Lecture number 6, Modern Features of Mass Media Language. The plan. Mass media style, two main functions of the language, and the second point of our lecture, the language of magazines. The life of society is constantly changing. The language that serves society quickly responds to these changes. Social transformation, as in the mirror, are reflected in the language. Mass media style, to a greater extent than all other styles of language, see these changes and interesting for contemporary readers. The language of news media is sensitive to changes in the society. In the era of globalization and the intensive development of international relations, foreign newspaper publications are becoming more and more relevant and interesting for contemporary readers. The language of news media is sensitive to changes in the society. Nowadays, the media has a great impact on the lives of people, the whole society, on our consciousness, even in our culture and language. Therefore, the problem of promptness and inadequacy of information transfer comes to the fore. In the journalistic style, two main functions of language are realized. The first of these is the information function, that is sending messages to people in a short time. The second important function is an impaction function, consisting in striving to influence people's opinions about any social and political or social problem. Therefore, the following can be considered the task of this style: to communicate information, to influence the mass consciousness, to call for action. Typical for both writing and electronic press are analytical reviews, comments, new items, promotional materials, interviews, etc. All these types of journalistic text can be found both on the internet and on the pages of the magazine and newspaper. Undoubtedly, each media has its own distinctive features, and each of these genres incarnates in them in different ways. The transmission of information is the main function of the media, and this process is really absolutely neutral. Undoubtedly, each media has its own distinctive features. Very often, the transmission of information is accompanied by a direct expression of the editorial or journalistic opinion. Evolution. The evolution is most transmitted through speech receptions and language tools that encourage the audience to a certain reaction to information. Different genres of media text differ in the different ratio of fact and evolution. The language of the newspaper is a living and constantly evolving system that requires constant creative tension from journalists. The proof in the skillful obtaining of the ready-to-use speech material, the relentless search for new means of expressing the evolution. Also, the specificity of the election of language resources on the newspaper page is largely determined by the calculation of a linguistically neutral mass readership. Newspaper text should be perceived easily and quickly regardless of profession, age, and education of the reader. From this it follows that the general availability and general understanding of the language tools used in the newspaper are permanent benchmarks in the journalistic activity. The pragmatic setting of the newspaper on the general availability of the text distinguishes mass communication from other functional styles. Economical expression of thought is the most important requirement of stylistics. Especially important is the accuracy and brightness for the title, because the headline is the first thing that draws attention to The first thing that the reader of the newspaper encounters when looking through the newspaper page is based on the headings in the content of the newspaper. English language newspaper materials are characterized by great emotional expressive saturation, and the power of their impact is originally linked with the brilliance and imaginary of the English language. The media of the English-speaking world are rightly considered to be the highway for the evolution of Western mass media of modern times. Thousands of publications are published in English in dozens of countries. More than 80% of information on the internet is distributed in the same language, which, according to objective reasons, becomes the language of intercultural dialogue. Over the years, the language of the media has been viewed by researchers as the immediate to a certain standard and the norms of the literal language. However, some British and domestic linguists who studied the language of newspaper journalism of the last 3 decades note the steady transformation of the latter towards ever more intelligibility and colloquialism. The canons of presentation of materials in modern newspaper journalism have changed markedly, and according to Rivers, is based on the 3 Wales: simplicity, clarity, and force. And spoken English with elbows made its way into the media in order to fully implement them. The prevalent style of the today's British newspaper is the style of unofficial writing, informal writing. The so-called readability formula proposed by Flash is interesting too. The main components of this formula are as follows: striving for at least optimum length of a paragraph sentence, use of personal pronouns, names, geographical names, dates, use of interest, human interest elements in the form of unusual facts, phenomena, use of transparent syntax and vocabulary. Within each of the British newspapers, the softening of speech in the direction of colloquialism and ease is traced as the genre is softened from the genre of the editorial commentary to the genre of secular chronicles, readers' letters. Speaking about the peculiarities of the modern English-speaking press, it should be mentioned that there are also traces that are typical for the print media style of the whole world in the last 3 decades: the desire for colloquialism, brevity, and accessibility. The editors of the largest American weekly Time created a special style of filling materials known as the Time style, which is distinguished by the stylistic effect of novelty and the freshness of usage. Many of the language innovations that appeared in the magazine have spread to newspapers and magazines not only in the USA, but also in the UK. The difficulty of analyzing lexical processes in the language of the newspaper is that the social situation of the period were experienced, like incidentally, the situation that was formed earlier is a broad, indefinite field of alternatives. The style of modern media can be defined as a system of interconnected language elements aimed at the performance of a certain communicative function, primarily the functions of informative and functions of influence on the reader. Possessing function. The need to write quickly in the conditions of modern communication leads to a wide use of language cliches, which in turn promotes the development and use in the language of the newspaper phraseological units. On the other hand, the desire for expression leads to the fact that very often these phraseological units turn out to be occasionally transformed. Restrictions in space on the newspaper page lead to an inevitable compression in language elements. In the field of grammar, the tendency toward compressions finds expressions in the omission of the service words, the verb to be in the headings, simplifying the use of contemporary forms, preference for laconic, compressed contractions. In the field of vocabulary, the language of newspapers also has its own characteristics. For example, some verbs due to the newspaper quite greater polysemy than it is registered in dictionaries. Newspaper article begins with the title. The peculiarity of English newspaper headlines is that they use predominantly verbal phrases. Actions that took place in the past are usually transmitted in the headings with verbs in the present tense, and actions related to the future are done with the help of the infinitive. The use of the verb in the present tense greatly enhances the dynamism of the narrative. For example, John saves 2 swimmers. However, in some newspapers, headlines when describing actions related to the past, they may be a past tense. However, for example, Pegaso conveyor stopped. Modern English political language is characterized by great dynamism, addiction to the newest vocabulary. Researchers note the most widely used in the language of the modern American press are the following features. Extensive use of complex adjectives. Construct complex nouns formed from 2 or more simple ones in such a way that a part of one word connecting with a part of another denotes a new concept. In addition, the time style is characterized by a great number of spoken expressions, buzzwords, neologism, and jargon, which the Weekly Times starts to use in its articles, one of the first. The very existence of time styling is a direct proof that the tendency to talk short to a more accessible and at the same time capacity from presenting information becomes leading in the modern English language press. Some researchers, such as Zabotkina, Orlov, call the presence of foreign language elements one of the style characteristics of the language of the modern press. According to Zabotkina, English continues to be enriched with foreign language elements. At the same time, the growth of the borrowing of words from Asian language, especially from Japanese, can be considered a new trend, which can be explained by the interest in Eastern culture and philosophies that grew in the late 20th century. The main attraction centers for new foreign language elements are social and political life, everyday life, culture, and scientific and technical activities. Modern English newspaper articles are also inherent in non-literal vocabulary. Dialectism, vulgarism, jargon, magnetism, are actively used by the creators of text as stylistic means. Today, the newspaper text is an example of the interaction of the standardized book language, people's speech, and jargon. Deviation from their literary norm in the process of producing the text create a certain tonality, expressiveness, contribute to the creation of realism in the description of phenomena. And the following literature reference was used in this lecture. Fedorova on some modern features of mass media language in English-speaking countries. The lecture is over. Thank you for your attention. Goodbye.